Order. Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown to move the motion.
Good afternoon, Mr. Twigg. May I thank you and Mr. Speaker through the Backbench Business Committee for granting me this opportunity to move the motion on the restoration and renewal in the House of Commons. May I also thank, I suppose I really should call him the Whip, who has stood in at very short notice because I gather the leader is required in a Cabinet Committee going on at this very moment. So I may I thank him very much, and may I thank all my colleagues for attending, who have, I think, two of them on the opposite side have been with me on the same journey for many years through the Finance Committee on this restoration and renewal debate, and we've seen all the twists and turns, and I thank also the Leader of the Opposition for being here to reply. So, to begin with, Mr. Twigg, I should draw my attention to the Declaration of Registered Members' Financial Interests as a Chartered Surveyor, although I don't expect to profit in any way from this whole venture. The Palace of Westminster has played a 900-year role in our political history. It is no surprise, therefore, that we are under a UNESCO World Heritage Site obligation to protect this wonderful Grade 1 listing building, which has iconic status throughout the world. And we need to maintain high standards so that it is a safe and accessible place for all who work and visit here. The Restoration and Renewal Programme has been briefly defined as a major refurbishment programme that is needed to protect and preserve the heritage of the Palace of Westminster and ensure it can continue to serve as the home to the UK Parliament. The parliamentary houses agreed there was a clear and pressing need for the repair works to be done. And there are a range of essential works that need to be carried out to prevent any further major fire incidents, falling masonry, removing of asbestos, improving the services to this place, which are cracking at the seams. It could mean, of course, doing the minimum amount of work to ensure that the existing building's layout remains largely the same, but we are able to function properly for the next generation of, say, 30 to 50 years. It could involve making sure the building is entirely safe, every bit of stonework thoroughly inspected, it is completely watertight, and a proper asbestos removal programme carried out so that everyone inside and outside the building is properly at minimal or no risk from that hazard. Finally, renewing all the services, as there is currently a significant risk of major failure. A more ambitious project, which would inevitably add considerable costs and timeline, would see other major developments also taking place. The palace could become increasingly more accessible for people with any kinds of disability. Services upgraded to the latest design, digitally future-proofing, and improved redesigned energy systems to provide optimal green standards to meet the aims set out in the Public Building Decarbonisation Scheme. As we heard in the Public Accounts Committee this week, the public sector has a target of achieving 50% reduction in direct emissions by 2032 and 75% reduction by 2037, compared with emissions on a baseline of 2017. The R&R Delivery Authority has set out an ambitious programme to enable the parliamentary estate to achieve net zero. However, it will be difficult to assess proper details on how this policy will be achieved until a definitive way forward is decided upon. However, even without that information, it is unlikely that the palace will be able to meet the same decarbonisation standards as many other public buildings due to the historically old nature of it. The energy system, which has not yet been decided on, could potentially be completely redesigned to provide optimal costs and energy efficiency. The palace has 4 main floors, 65 different levels, with just one lift that meets modern disability standards. This means that 12% of the building is currently accessible to wheelchair users. And I'm sure other members of Parliament will have experienced for themselves the difficulty of getting disabled people into this place. And we have, under the Disability Act, to do better than what we are doing at the moment. So I would say, Mr. Twigg, this is an essential part of the upgrade in renewal and restoration. So the programme is committed to improving accessibility, which they have outlined in the business case, updating it following regular engagement with representative staff with disabilities and with independent accessibility and including technical experts. But, Mr. Twigg, the size of this project is enormous. It is estimated to cost somewhere between the Olympics at 8.77 billion and Crossrail, which cost 18.25 billion. And the cost will ultimately be decided by the scenario chosen. In my capacity as Deputy Chair of the Public Accounts Committee, I have seen time after time large public procurement projects, whether by the MOD, Department of Health, or elsewhere, time and costs overrunning, some costing the taxpayers billions of pounds more than the original budget. And this was due to the client, in inverted commas, usually the department, changing their mind on specification as it progressed, always wanting the latest bells and whistles. All of this work is bound to cost significant cost to the public purse, running into tens of billions of pounds. And while it has been assessed that some of the essential work, such as the asbestos removal, can be done in stages working around the usual business of the House, meaning at weekends or when the House is not sitting, it would appear that a level of decant for some period will be a serious option to consider to prevent the time for works and costs being completely excessive. As the Clerk of the House said in the recent public accounts hearing, we have an asbestos incidence about once a year. The asbestos is a really extensive challenge. The largest other project that we could find had about 90 people for about 18 to 20 months. It has become quite clear, therefore, that it will be impossible to complete this project without some decant from both houses at some stage. The decant option would minimise costs, even if it is only a partial decant or one house being upgraded at a time, which would have the advantage of allowing one House of Commons, say, to remain in Parliament throughout the period, allaying the fear of some that they believe we will never return once the project is complete. It would also mean that important speeches, both at a government level and at an individual level, for example, their maiden speech or their retirement speech, can still actually be made in Parliament, one chamber or another. So a partial decant will allow all the necessary works to take place to remove whatever level of asbestos is deemed to be acceptable and renewal of all the services. And whilst it's technically possible to carry out the work around the house, not only would this take considerably longer, but it would not account for any unpredictability that's found as the works are going along. And anybody, particularly as a chartered surveyor, knows that there are huge numbers of an area, voids and other areas, floorboards, roof voids, that it is impossible, no matter how well the intrusive surveys are done, that as the work is progressing, you find unacceptable snags, which of course needs to be resolved, which means the project will take considerably longer. Thereafter, it would be possible for both bits of the house to be reoccupied, such as both chambers with all of the necessary essential services, i.e. restaurants, committee rooms, etc., by siting those services in nearby temporary structures. In 2018, the House of Commons voted with a majority of 16 votes, 4% of the 456 people voting, for the houses to be fully decanted during the works and returning as soon as possible. But after the debate, the House of Lords approved a motion for a full and timely decant. In April 2020, the sponsor body expected to start works in 2026. Assuming that that was required to develop a business case in 2023, the sponsor body now estimates that the main works will start in 2027. But the cheapest plan involves a full decant of the Palace of Westminster for between 10 and 20 years, with the work costing in the region of 7 to 13 billion pounds. These are the figures given to the Commission by the sponsor body. Another suggestion, which would cost the most and take the longest, would mean that the project would be done with the houses remaining within the chambers throughout the entirety of the restoration and renewal programmes of the works with no transfer. It's estimated that this option would cost a staggering 11 to 22 billion and take in the region of 46 to 76 years. The Leader of the House has tabled a motion for next week that seeks the House of Commons endorsement of the Commission's latest recommendations, seeking approval of the establishment of a new joint department to take over from the sponsor body function. If the motion is approved, secondary legislation will then be required to abolish the sponsor body and transfer its functions to the new joint department, with staff 2Ping over. In hindsight, Mr. Twigg, it is clear that the sponsor body did not function as successfully as it could have done, or even as it was supposed to do under the Act. Because what it was supposed to do under the Act was to fully consult members of Parliament, peers, and above all, people who work in this place, if for no other reason, to seek their views and see if there was a consensus on the way forward, particularly on the controversial aspects like decant. But more importantly, because it was those people, all of us, who were going to be inconvenienced by this project over a number of years. So this, I would suggest, this consultation exercise is critically important for the new joint body. If the motion is approved, secondary legislation will be required to abolish the sponsor body and transfer its functions to this new joint department. With a clear deadline of responsibility, there is a degree of confusion surrounding this project. Unlike the Olympics, where the sponsor body was able to deliver with a clear remit to the government department involved and a clear deadline, it had a much simpler task. Now, it was envisaged that the House itself, the commissions, would transfer its client's function to the sponsor body, who would then get on and do the job. Actually, I think inevitably, the commission authorised by the House was always going to have a role closely liaising with the sponsor body. And I think it was a disconnect, partly perhaps because of COVID, that didn't happen. Suspicions arose. The sponsor body came up with a huge cost, which the commissioners then said was unacceptable. But what would have been much preferable was that Parliament should have been more closely in the decision making on this project. Far too much power has been delegated to the commissions instead of them then consulting Parliament. As we saw in February when the sponsor body was abolished, with very little publicity and very little explanation. Having had a series of hearings since with the Public Accounts Committee and meetings with the clerks, union representatives and the Chief Executive, it is clear that the lines of authority need to be much clearer if this project is to succeed successfully in the future. There's a further problem, Mr. Twigg, and it's this. With general elections taking place every 5 years or less, it does mean that new parliamentarians will be elected. That will change the balance, inevitably change the balance of Parliament, and that will change the parameters of the project. This will not only add significantly to the costs, but at times it takes to complete. So we've got to find a way, I believe, of making sure that once we do have this proper consultation, we do somehow enshrine whatever is decided that we should do to take this enormous project forward, and make sure that we don't continually adding to it, in my phrase, adding bells and whistles to it, because that will add a huge range of uncertainty to it. So the misconception of how the Restoration and Renewal Act set up the delivery authority meant that it was not able to talk properly to the decision makers before February. After the commissions had decided that the sponsor body should be abolished, then the delivery body started talking directly to the commissions. This shortened line of communication actually started to unblock some of the blockages that had crept into the system. There is a misconception on how the sponsor body is responsible for restoration and renewal compared to the sponsor body that ran the Olympics. However, it's now being abolished, and we now see that we will have this new joint department. So I would urge that new joint department to improve their communications, not only with the Commission, to whom they are directly accountable to, but to Parliament as a whole, so that Parliament is constantly updated. If they're updated, then they can have a view on the whole matter, and hopefully it won't continually need changing the project as it goes on. A major buy-in of the project will help with the more controversial aspects, such as the decant debate. The parliamentary sponsor body failed in two important areas. Firstly, it did not engage comprehensively with parliamentarians and staff to ascertain what they wanted from this project. But secondly, off its own back, it gave unacceptably long decant completion times, which came with momentously large attached accounts. The House of Commons and House of Lords Commissions, as I've said, became increasingly alarmed by the figures, and they decided to abolish it. But this, at a stroke, baked in certain nugatory and unnecessary costs. £80 million for the replacement of an unwanted chamber in the Richmond House. £20 million for the fire safety system, which will now have to be ripped out in the cellar. At least £100 million for setting up and abolishing the sponsor body. So that adds up to well over £300 million, completely wasted. And we can all imagine what that £300 million would buy in our constituencies in terms of upgraded school programmes and so on. But I believe we are on a better track now by seeing exactly what is wrong with the previous line of authority. And when the new department is set up, they will be working on a grid of essential works which will help ascertain exactly what timeline should take place for the new work. This can then be considered by the commissions and by the House, and based on hard evidence, both houses will then need to be consulted again to establish the general direction of travel. Of course.
I'm looking to the honourable member's comments, and as he rightly says, we've been on the Finance Committee together for many years, and I do have some concerns, I don't know he's reflecting on, that we've had long debates, many reviews. I haven't been involved in all of them. I thought we got some agreement. All right, it's controversial that we were going to have a decant and it was going to be expensive. Maybe there were concerns about how the sponsor body operated. But the one thing that I'm concerned about is that bringing the arrangements for the organisation of this massive project in-house will not necessarily solve those difficulties. We haven't got a great track record in this place of managing large capital projects. Nothing like as large as this, large capital projects, very efficiently and well.
I think my honourable friend, if I may say that, I've known him so long in this place, but the honourable gentleman has a very good point, which I'm actually coming on to towards the end of my speech, which I'm sort of working towards. The Minister will be glad to know. So the Palace needs to be upgraded to the highest possible digital and security standards. And if there are any changes to the working of Parliament, it can be accommodated. Well, I commend the adaptations made during the COVID-19 period, especially in terms of online working and digital voting. It should not have been such an unprecedented crisis that pushed us to adapting these things for the 23rd century. We need to be faster and more accommodating at change to meet the challenges of the modern world. Finally, the education services in Victoria Garden were only ever given temporary permission. A permanent solution needs to be found with modern digital working facilities so that the aim of giving a parliamentary visit to every school child throughout their school career can be encouraged. If taxpayers' money were no object, and of course you can never say that, there would be potential to go much further by providing glass roofs over some of the walkways and pathways to provide extra work space. But with my public accounts hat on, we must always consider the taxpayers and the value for money aspects. So, Mr. Chairman, I have laid out what needs to be done. The much more important question, which the honourable gentleman was getting us onto, is how it should be done to provide the most value for money and the optimal outcome on reaching project deadlines. As I've already said, the project is likely to cost in excess of tens of billions of pounds. As I know from long experience as Deputy Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, the scope for mission creep and overruns for large government projects such as Thameslink, Crossrail and HS2 is enormous. The only exception was the Olympics, and the reason for that was that there was an absolute deadline for when it had to be delivered. But equally important, it was set up with a sponsor body with clear delivery guidelines to complete the work. Critically, That is why Restoration and Renewal Act of 2019 tried to mimic this government structure. Now that we have a proposal to form a joint department, there will be a joint client team, which will have a new joint department function created by a team in Parliament. However, moving on to the Honourable Gentleman's point, I believe this is fraught with difficulties, as with great respect, neither of the clerks of the Parliament or the House who signed off the contracts for the original Elizabeth Tower project, which was originally estimated to cost 29.9 billion, ended up at costing, well, it hasn't even finished yet, but it's estimated to end up at costing 86 million pounds, i.e. nearly 3 times its original cost. It is unfortunate that the same clerks will be the same people signing off and having legal responsibility for this particular project. Now, I don't wish to denigrate the clerks in any way. They are splendid people. They have huge legal and parliamentary knowledge. They have huge knowledge of parliamentary procedure. But with great respect, they don't have the knowledge to manage a project of this size. To be fair to them, they were wise enough to create an expert panel of knowledgeable and well-qualified people. But it is unclear whether this panel will be in place throughout the continuity of the project. But in my view, it is absolutely imperative that they are, and the joint commissions should accept their advice, because in that way, the decision-making process of the clerks and the commission are getting professional advice in a form, hopefully, that is digestible and understandable. So finally, in conclusion, what should happen next? The new joint department should be set up as soon as possible, with the advisory panel, as I said, being given statutory status, with an expectation that its advice will be followed, and any department must be given the authority of Parliament. They should then widely and rapidly consult parliamentarians and staff on what is expected from this project, and within 3 months, and a properly costed business case, which must be approved by Parliament, and then move as swiftly as possible to putting the project out to tender, with strong expectations on timetables and costings. Any departure from these must be approved by Parliament, and in any case, a quarterly update must be given to Parliament as a matter of course, not 6 months after the sponsor body has been effectively abolished, and in line with the procedure that Parliament has for HS2. So I am pleased to learn that in one of the Public Accounts Committee recommendations in the report issued yesterday, the Leader of the House and the Treasury will be completely bound into the process of R&R. Because whilst, of course, Parliament funds this process on votes that Parliament is able to debate and vote on, the government has a major input, because, of course, however much is spent on this project has to be raised by taxation. So they are both crucial partners in this whole operation. Mr. Chairman, I hope I have demonstrated that not only is this a huge and complicated project that's going to cost tens of billion pounds and go on for tens of years, it is critical to our democracy that we get it right so that future generations can benefit from it. And I think that if we, this generation, take the correct decisions and take the pain of all the disruption, I say to the Minister, and do the project all in one go with the necessary but kept to a minimum decant, I think future generations will thank us. If we have a building project in this place for the next 30 to 70 years, I really don't think they will thank us. And I don't think they will thank us either if one of the Commission's objective is that the work should be done on a short-term basis. Make do and bodge, I call it. I think that the work needs, whatever work we decide to do, needs to be done to the highest possible standards, meeting the highest environmental standards, and expected to last for the longest possible time, so that we can leave a legacy, possibly with some improvements, certainly with improvements to disability access, hopefully to education facilities, and hopefully in a modern way of working with a proper digital parliament, that actually future generations can be proud of what this generation has done to uphold the highest standards of maintenance of our wonderful Palace of Westminster. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
The question is that this House has considered the restoration and renewal programme in the House of Commons.